Now, it is my absolute pleasure to hand over to Dr. Emma Wincup for her lecture today on navigating uncertainty. Emma.
Okay, hopefully people can see my slides now. Perhaps someone could give me a thumbs up or a wave.
I can see your slides.
Okay, great. Thank you very much then. So it's this lecture's been in the diary for a little while, so it's great to be here today kind of presenting, and it's given me an interesting opportunity, I think, to reflect on the 5 years I've spent now in the charity sector, as you can said, after a very lengthy career in academia, but still quite a lot of my working life left. So you'll hear more about my kind of transition through different sectors in a moment then. So thank you for taking time away from busy schedules. I know regardless of what sector you work in, September's really busy. So I really appreciate that. So yeah, so it's actually 5 years ago last Monday, so it's a really kind of good time to kind of for me to reflect. Okay, so let me take you first of all in a slightly kind of frivolous way then through what's happened in those last 5 years. And I promise I won't do a potted history, and I don't think I could do that in half an hour of what's happened in the last 5 years in any case. So this is what I was expecting when I moved sectors. I knew it was going to be a challenge for all sorts of reasons. I suppose what I wasn't expecting, because it is, to use that overused word, unprecedented, was the kind of scale of the challenge that kind of lay ahead, and how we've had to adapt then to that when there's been a kind of demand for evidence at a much faster pace than perhaps ever been before. So we've had five prime ministers, slightly cheated because I couldn't think of a four. Those four of those have been from Conservative Party. We've obviously had a change of government recently. It's far from over, but we've had 3 years of a cost of living crisis. It feels like we're in a kind of almost a perpetual crisis at the moment around financial hardship. Many of the people we work with closely are struggling to see how things could be different in the future, which is a really quite sorry state for them and for society more generally. We've obviously had 2 general elections, a pandemic, and many more challenges. And these have had a big impact then, particularly on the people we work with, which are people who are experiencing poverty in its many different forms, from people who are experiencing extreme hardship, destitution, through to people who over the last few years have found themselves struggling financially in a way they've not before and hadn't expected to, because of the things that are happening, not just in the UK, but in the kind of wider world that have affected them. So it's certainly been it's not been a time for me to be bored, and certainly a time for kind of challenges, meet those kind of evidence needs which I spoke about. So what I want to do today is tell people a little about JRF. I know kind of JRF is well known, but some people may not know about its kind of current role. It's changed quite significantly in the last few years. Tell you a little bit about my role, and also tell you about the newly created team that I'm part of, the Insight Infrastructure. And then I want to spend time telling you about 2 projects that I've been working on. One is where we've built a lived experience group, which has been running since 2020, and a more recent development, which has been running for the past 2 to 3 years, which is the Grounded Voices programme. Both qualitative in their approach, some kind of more sort of research focus than others. Some of them, the lived experience group, as you'll see, has kind of quite a wide remit in terms of what it does. But they've helped us then to meet that demand for evidence in an uncertain world. Okay. Also just want to mention briefly that I work on our destitution in the UK work as well. I won't talk about that today. Happy to do so in discussion. That's a programme of work that's led by a team up in Heriot Watt, which we work very closely with the voluntary and community sector, because they are the kind of core part of the programme. It involves around 100 crisis support agencies working with us to be able to produce that study. So that's a kind of another kind of connection I have with the wider voluntary and community sector. So for the next, well, a bit less than half an hour then, that's what I'm planning to do. But first of all, let me tell you about JRF. So JRF was established in 1904, so it's a long-established charity. The founder was Joseph Rowntree. He was a visionary Quaker businessman and a social reformer, and the Rowntree name is well known for, particularly through the kind of confectionery that it was produced. So he did things like build New Earswick, which is a village in York, people of low incomes, including some of the people who worked in his factories, and that was about giving people decent homes and affordable rents, and that's the kind of work JRF is still doing today. He was really keen to understand the causes of poverty and disadvantage to create a better society. And it's his son, Seaborn Rowntree, then, who was a pioneering social researcher. He did one of the first investigations into poverty that there wasn't. And we try and kind of, in a very, very different way in the kind of modern world, replicate some of that in our work today. So our work remains focused on poverty, but it's continually evolved. And this is our current statement of purpose, which was updated fairly recently then. And you can see then it's about poverty, but it's also about justice. It's about kind of tackling inequality, and it recognises some of the contemporary challenges that we have today, like in relation to, for example, climate change. Some of you may have been to the Joseph Rowntree building, and that's our head office, which is in York. It looks quite grand there. It is a lovely building. It's in a beautiful park. The bit where we all do our work is kind of a more modern extension on the back, but it's that family home, and working in York then is very much central to our mission today. So if you ever visit the building, you can see how it very much how it used to be a family home, and proudly see the Joseph Rowntree's wardrobes, which now have IT equipment in them. So I mentioned that because it started in York, but it becomes something much bigger in a sense of looking now across the UK. So we have teams in London now. We have a small team up in Scotland, developing work in Northern Ireland, and then we work in Wales through the Bevan Foundation. But what's the heart of the work then is what was set out to do originally then was to make sure we created a better society, and tackling poverty was crucial to that. So how did I get here? Well, in the scenic route, I guess. I've spent most of my career until 2019 in academia, apart from a brief secondment to the civil service in Wales. I actually spent time there in around the time of the evolution and the creation of what was the Welsh National Assembly for Wales at the time, working to develop their drug and alcohol policy, which they had partly devolved responsibility for. So that's the point in my kind of career then that I was kind of perhaps closer to kind of policy and policy making and addressing kind of social problems. But obviously through research, we do those things too, but in a slightly more removed way. So my research had been predominantly then in applied research rather than theoretical research, although I've written quite a lot of years over kind of methodological issues, and particularly working around criminal justice, health and welfare, and quite often the interface between all of those things. So it's perhaps unsurprisingly then I ended up at JRF in a sense because all the research I wanted to do was about addressing what we might call social policy issues, or the blurred boundaries with other fields as well, like health. My work had involved some working with the voluntary and community sector up until that point, particularly doing evaluations of work and where there was funding had gone to the voluntary and community sector, and independent academics were commissioned to evaluate the work that they were doing, and those were mostly evaluations. So I moved to JRF to take up a new role, a qualitative research manager role. Around that time, JRF had moved from being a traditional research funder. And I think often that's what JRF is still known for by people who had connections with JRF in the past, either by being funded by them to do research or have engaged with the kind of wide range of research that we've done over the years, not just on poverty, but all sorts of issues as well around kind of communities, for example, or social care is just a couple of instances of kind of wider work. at the point I moved to the organisation, it was on a journey then to be a social change organisation, wanting to make use of the evidence it was producing then to change things. And that involved rethinking the kind of what was funded, but also the kind of roles that you needed in an organisation to be able to influence things in relation to policy. It also involved rethinking perhaps about how you do research. The traditional model of perhaps putting out a tender, or and then people kind of coming back with proposals and then commissioning that work and then seeing that through and then thinking about what you do with that work more towards the end. Then it was something that's kind of difficult to do in a social change organisation that wants to be more responsive. It's important in an organisation like JRF for us to think not just in reactive ways, but in proactive ways, but you do want to be responding to what's out there as well. And I guess JRF also wanted to think about its role as a foundation. So quite unusual in some ways in the voluntary community sector as an organisation that has an endowment through it, gifted to them through its history, and is not in a position, for example, like other organisations, to have to raise funds through grants or fundraising or different ways. So what my role was doing then was particularly about thinking about how we could develop research capacity in-house, and how you meet then the need for timely evidence to support our work. And so that's the kind of the role I kind of came into. It's moved in slightly different ways because of what's happened in the wider world, but also kind of some changes in the kind of the strategy of the organisation. And today it's moved into the kind of world of insights, where we're thinking less about just evidence gathering through research, data analysis and evaluation, but kind of more broadly then about what you can draw upon then to influence the work that we do. And that work might be media work, it might be campaigning work, it might be policy development, it might be influencing politicians in private then. So I'm part of this insight infrastructure team, which is very grand, but hopefully at its heart it's something quite similar. In tech permitting, you'll be able to see the animation we've produced in a moment, and to which summarises what we're doing in a minute or two.
We work towards a future free from poverty, in which people and planet can flourish, and we're committed to getting there faster. Making sense of data on poverty is often difficult. It doesn't always reflect the reality of living in poverty right now, and it can be hard to turn that knowledge into meaningful action. That's why at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, we're developing the Insight Infrastructure Programme, a powerful toolkit to help tackle injustice and inequality in the UK. Meet your new trusted toolkit, powered by existing and new data, experimental approaches, lived experience of people, and a network of like-minded social change organisations. With open collaboration and innovation, we will democratise access to high-quality data and evidence, so we can all drive positive change in our communities. Join us on this journey towards a more equitable future for all.
Okay, before I go on to talk in more detail about what that means in relation to my work, and I've just moved on to the next slide so the video doesn't play repeatedly. It's worth saying a little bit more about why we wanted to develop that insight infrastructure. It's partly about our needs as an organisation, wanting to be able to move quickly and in a very responsive way to the kind of big challenges we've been facing over the last few years, because it's became very evident that we don't always have time to commission significant amounts of research. We can't rely often on the the data sources that we've traditionally relied on. So at JRF, we have a team of analysis experts. They've often, well, they still do, because it's still useful. I don't want to give the impression it's not, but there's a real time lag sometimes between what we're seeing in official statistics on poverty and hardship and actually what's happening on the ground. And that was particularly relevant in the COVID times when people's kind of incomes kind of plummeted overnight. It's also been particularly relevant as well in the cost of living crisis, where the traditional definition of poverty, which is in relation to medium incomes, doesn't always capture people who might be struggling because their incomes look okay on paper, but factor in their housing costs, their child care costs, any debt, paying back any debt they might have, and that starts to not be enough, even though it looks okay on paper. So it's important for us to do that. But the other part of the insight infrastructure as well is thinking about our role as an organisation with some financial wealth to be able to support others, particularly in the voluntary and community sector, with their research needs. So being able to kind of share data, it's mostly statistical data at the moment, but in a usable form, so people who don't necessarily have the time or the expertise to kind of access the many data sources out there can do that. But it's also about trying to bring the voluntary and community sector together to be able to think about what data they routinely have and how it could be used to support kind of change through kind of campaigning work, for example, and influencing work. So I'll spend a bit of time now just taking you through two of the kind of key projects that I work on, which are both quite different in many ways, but have the same ambition, I guess, to be engaged closely with people who have direct experience of poverty and hardship. The first is our lived experience group. It's called the Grassroots Poverty Action Group. That name was chosen by the members, and they also created the logo that's there with one of our creative designers. And the logo is designed to kind of represent the kind of what they want to do and how they see the group as in terms of people kind of coming together, people growing and developing, and bringing kind of the grassroots into kind of the kind of space where it's not always heard, for example, in policy making. So it was set up originally to support our UK poverty work. That's an annual report we do every year. It's quantitative based, draws predominantly on official statistics, and we wanted then to kind of think about a way in which we could incorporate participatory elements into that work, not kind of training up people who with direct experience of poverty to be analysts, but more about how we could connect the expertise our analysts had from analysing the data and the kind of direct experience people had on the ground of living in hardship, but also not just their experiences, the kind of experiences they bring from their kind of communities, from the work that they do either professionally or in a kind of volunteering sense. So we set up the Grassroots Poverty Action Group, and I'll just tell you a little bit about it briefly, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. So it's around 15 people. They represent groups at risk of poverty. So we have people who are disabled, for example. We have some unpaid carers, lone parents, particular people from different backgrounds. They live across the UK. So we have people who are in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, as well as England. And it was established in 2020 in the height of the COVID pandemic. So unsurprisingly, we started online. Wasn't sure whether it would work. Fortunately, it did. And actually, that model has been useful in terms of bringing together people who wouldn't all normally be able to be in that space, either because of the distance involved or because of their personal situation means it's finding it difficult to travel. So, some of the people just wouldn't be able to kind of come along if we went back to doing it face to face. We do have a face-to-face meetup though now once a year, but always offer a hybrid option as well. So we meet monthly, we meet on Zoom. We have a core team of JRF staff who attend, and then we bring in different people from the organisation and external guests as well, depending on what we're doing. And it's important to say we have an independent facilitator who's on the call. So I'm going to take a moment to thank her for her work, because that's been really helpful in terms of kind of supporting not only the group, but us to kind of create this space where we can work together in a very kind of flexible way. So it's not a kind of traditional research project. What it does, it is provide a way of supporting the research that we do, but not just research. Over time, it's begun as a space where it can support policy development. It's helped us create some of that insight infrastructure, and it's given people in the group then a voice, which is helpful for them, but also is helpful to us as an organisation. So let me just give you a couple of examples then of the kind of things we'll do, and I'll just focus perhaps on research and public voice for now. So in terms of research, one of the things that we do and we'll be doing next week is we support our cost of living tracker project. So this is a piece of survey work that we do, which comes out twice a year, to kind of capture in the moment then how people are experiencing the kind of cost of living crisis. So it's something then that kind of complements the other work that we do using official statistics. And the group have built into that into a number of ways. For example, they've helped design some of the questions. They've helped understand some of the data that's been that the team have been struggling to kind of make sense of. They've talked to the team about how to kind of present things in a way which kind of captures kind of truthfully how people are feeling on the ground in relation to the cost of living crisis. So those are some examples of what they've done, and that's something we repeatedly work on. Hopefully, we won't be doing that forever, because we're obviously all working towards the cost of living crisis coming to an end. We also do quite a bit of work around public voice and trying to develop this at the moment. So the members of the group have written blogs, sometimes on their own, sometimes co-authored with us, and we share them through our social media channels. Members of the group have spoken at events with our support. They've also done interviews, anything from being on the morning show sofas to appearing in newspapers. And we've been working recently then to build a relationship with them. So when they feel able to, if we want to respond to something quickly, we can work with them and share things through our social media channels. And we did that over the summer in relation to some of the plans to reform personal independence payments for those with disabilities. So let me tell you a little bit more about the second project, which is a more recent one, and where it started from. So this is the Grounded Voices programme. As an organisation, we don't provide services directly. There's another part of the Joseph Rowntree group, which deals with housing, and they provide social housing and also care services, but the foundation doesn't provide any services. So unlike other organisations, for example, who have research and policy teams, but also say run food banks or provide advice services, we don't have that. So we don't have a natural way then to bring into the organisation what matters to people who are struggling to afford what they need. So we wanted to find a way to be able to do that, to find out quickly then what was happening on the ground, things that we may not have heard about in particular, or things felt we needed to kind of hear more about, and in particular to bring in people whose voices we don't often hear from in the poverty debate. So, for example, people from minoritized communities or young people, and it's still sort of developing, and we have this kind of broader ambition over time then to make what we're doing through this project available to a kind of wider group of people, so not just to influence JRF's work. And if I could just tell you quickly how we developed it, so you get a sense of it, and apologies if I run a little bit for Jürgen here. So we developed it with a partner called Humankind Research. So we've been drawing upon their expertise as someone who not only does social research, but was also kind of working in that more kind of commercial space, for example, around with brands and marketing research. And that's something that's been really important for us in terms of bringing in new ideas. We worked with them initially to develop the methods we might use. It was really important for us to have a programme of work that people wanted to be part of and wanted to engage with, because you'll see in a moment we work with people for quite a long period of time. So rather than us making assumptions about how people wanted to share what was important to them, we worked with 12 people initially to develop that. And this is what we tested it, and then we brought it in-house in wave 1, and we're now running wave 2. And this is what it looks like. And I won't go into all the details, but again, happy to share experiences. But at the heart of that work is the diaries that they do, some online diaries. But that's kind of, we don't just do that. That might happen sometimes with other projects where people just ask questions through online diaries. We take time to get to know people, make sure they understand what we're trying to do with the work, build rapport with them, give the opportunity of obviously to say no if that's not for them. And then also to, through the kind of more group activities, that the ones in blue, which people can choose to do if they want to bring them back into connect with each other if they want to, and connect with us, so they have a sense of what we're hearing, and then choosing what they want to kind of focus on, and then we wrap that up appropriately at the end. And throughout this, then we work with a team of 10 lived experienced advisors who've been part of the programme. So just to show you briefly then what this looks like, we use the technology then to support their storytelling. It's an app that they use. They set 2 diary tasks a week. This lasts for 12 weeks. We provide a written form of the diary task and also a video, and they can respond to us in a form they want to. And that means that they can give us do a voice note if they want to. They can share a video. They can type their responses. They can give a photo, or a mixture of all those things. And that's really quite quick. You know, we set a task yesterday morning on 10 o'clock, and content begins to kind of come in straight away. And it's content that obviously will take time to analyse, something we can still use in the short term to support colleagues' work. So it's not participatory. There wasn't time to do that, but there was time to incorporate some participatory elements, and I'll just briefly explain what they are. We designed it with people. So although we wanted to kind of get quick, timely insights, we wanted also to make sure we were doing something that kind of worked and was a good experience for people as well as good for us. So we did take time there, and I think that's kind of important. You'll see that's one of my takeaways on the final slide as well. So designing it with people was really helpful in terms of challenging some of the ideas that we had about how best to work with people, and also about kind of making sure you don't abandon some of the kind of tried and tested ways of doing social research, because people value those opportunities. We have continued to have an advisory board made up of people who've been part of that programme, so the programme evolves over time, and they help us with all sorts of challenges, like how do you ask people about politics was kind of one recent example. We meet with them around 6 times a year. When we get people together to share what we've heard, we allow people to choose the group topics. So we give them a list, and they work with us then to decide the ones that they want to talk about as a group, and then select from it. So there's kind of choice there as well. And we also allow people to suggest diary tasks. So one of the tasks when people are settled in will be to kind of say, well, what are people not talking about that you want to talk about? And that we incorporate that where we can into the kind of current programme of work or the next one that we do. So some reflections then to take away. So I've come into the charity sector then having to think very differently about research. I've had to adapt the skills and expertise I've had in a very different context. And that context is partly because I've switched sectors, but it's not just that. It's because also things in the wider world have changed how we might do research. So, the pandemic obviously has opened up opportunities to do online research in a way we couldn't perhaps have contemplated a few years ago. I've had to let go, I think, things I've always done and taught other people how to do and written about, and to embrace quite different ways of working. And I think for me, when I was reflecting upon this, it's just, it's easy then to kind of get caught up in a kind of process of, I need to find evidence quickly. How can I do that? But quick for me can't be just dirty research, as we tend to call it in the research world. I think there are ways of doing that so that you can meet the evidence needs of your organisation, but still in a way that's kind of respectful to the kind of people that you're working with. And it's kind of, for me, then it's become very much about values-driven research, not methodological purity. So our organisation has 3 values. Well, we have many values, but they're kind of summarised around care, trust, and making a difference. And that seems to be quite a helpful way of thinking about how to do research. What are the things am I kind of compromising on? And some things you can't compromise on, even if there is a demand for evidence quickly. It's always got to be research that's ethical and sensitive, particularly given the group that we work with. So I guess my solutions to this are really in kind of 2 and 4 then. It's to be flexible and embrace what we're hearing from other sectors. So working with the Grounded Voices programme, with an organisation that was able to bring in what's the kind of online technology that was happening in other sectors, has been really, really helpful in thinking about how we could use it, not just to kind of parachute in what you might use for brand research, but to think about how you can use it and adapt it to the kind of different kind of context that we work in. And it's also, I think, for us, it's not been about trying to set up discrete projects every time we need evidence. It's about creating that necessary infrastructure that allows us to do that. And that's built on the kind of relationships we have, particularly with our lived experience group, because we've been working with some of them for over 4 years. But the people who take part in Grounded Voices then become part of this kind of community for us. Not all, some people want to engage and then move on to different things, but for those who want to, there's opportunities then for them to kind of keep working with us. So they might finish the programme, but they can become one of our advisors if they want to. They can work with our media team to be trained up in how to do media work. There's kind of opportunities there. Sometimes kind of being part of a research project brings out the kind of inner campaign of people. It gives them a sort of way of dealing with the many challenges they're facing in a kind of positive way. So we've seen some people there who have been really kind of engaged and particularly keen to work with us, and obviously helps the sense of it being rewarding. I'm going to stop there. Very happy to answer kind of questions, but I think I've overrun a teeny bit, and I don't